Welcome to #Gen Z. I'm your host, Megan Grace. Hey there, this is episode 28 of #Gen Z. The year's 2021 and we are back. 2020 was a doozy of a year. In all honesty, podcasting just didn't feel right. Not because there weren't great stories to tell, but I felt like I needed to sit back and observe society for a minute or two. But I'm feeling like it's time to get back into it and share the important stories of Generation Z. In the last two episodes, I explored Generation Z's perspectives on voting and politics. In this episode and the few to follow, I'd like to explore some of the issues Generation Z has voiced to be of their greatest concern and interest when it comes to politics. This episode will dive into a topic Generation Z has been sounding the alarm on for years now, the environment. But we aren't just talking about going green and celebrating Earth Day. Generation Z has truly rallied around and taken ownership of the environmental movement and elevating discussions around climate change, climate justice, and a brighter world for us all. In fact, a recent study on Generation Z politics found that the environment and addressing climate change is an issue that unifies Generation Z across political ideologies. I'm joined in this episode by J Patel, a youth climate activist from Los Angeles, California. Kevin is the founder and executive director of One Up Action, an organization that supports marginalized youth by providing them with the resources needed to take innovative steps to tackle the climate crisis within their local communities for a regenerative future. Kevin has been fighting for over 8 years for climate justice for all. With the help of a friend, he has created the first ever Youth Climate Commission in LA County to amplify youth voices on the climate crisis. Kevin currently serves on 3 different councils: Youthtopia, World Climate Power 2020, and Intersectional Environmentalist Council. He is also a UN Together band ambassador. I'm very excited to welcome my guest, J Patel, who is a youth climate activist based in Los Angeles, my home state of California. I miss it dearly sometimes. He's here to chat about all good things related to the climate movement and environmentalism, and he's definitely got a lot he can share with us. So Kevin, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here and just talk about environmentalism and youth activism.
Yeah, you're very passionate, and I know you're doing so much in this space. Can you just give the listeners a little bit of a background about who you are and what you're currently doing? And we'll get into kind of the deepness of your story in a minute. But who are you, J Patel?
My name is J Patel. I've been living here in South Central Los Angeles for all my life, and I've been an activist for over 8 years. Yeah, I've been fighting for climate justice for that long, and it's very important for me to make sure that young people are very involved in climate activism. And a lot of the things that I've been doing, just talking about intersectionality within the movement and making sure I'm fighting for my community.
So you said you've been in the climate movement for 8 years now. That's almost a good portion of your life, really. And I would just love to know how you found your calling. Like, how did you get into the climate change movement and the environmentalism movement and finding your voice and finding your space in that? Walk us through your journey and what that looked like.
I first began with environmentalism and climate change and climate justice, right? I think I started at a very, very young age. I was never like regular kids. I was always, outside in the garden wanting to plant something. My dream was to become a botanist. And I think from elementary all the way to middle school, that was pretty much the dream. But when I got into middle school, I just, I became aware of issues that were happening in my community of South Central Los Angeles, such as, just the homelessness crisis, how we, South Los Angeles, my community was a food desert and a food prison. I like to call it a food prison. It was coined by the gangster gardener who's Ron Finley. But essentially, a food prison is basically, communities that are, sacrifice zones that don't get enough resources or are there's no investment in our communities, especially in the sense of food and all these other resources. But a food desert specifically is when you don't have access to non-GMO, organic, or vegan foods, and you have to go to more affluent areas to find those types of foods, right? And so that's where I really began my journey during first semester of my sixth grade year, during middle school, teaching students that, these types of foods and foods in general come from a farm, not the fast food chain. Because when I would ask my peers, my fellow peers, I would ask them, where does food come from? A lot of them would reply with, it comes from fast food chains, which was sad to see. So I was teaching them about food deserts, food prisons, and how we as a community are one, and how we can prevent that, and just where food comes from. But second semester, my life changed in a matter of minutes, and I was diagnosed with heart palpitations and irregular heartbeat. And so that experience, going from a healthy, a healthy kid, that was playing and running and playing badminton and tennis, going from a healthy kid to one that's in and out of the hospital was very traumatic for me. And I just didn't know where it was stemming from until, eighth grade, where I kind of, did my own research and said, enough is enough, right? I can see that my community is not only being affected by all these other issues and all these other inequalities, but I'm also seeing that Los Angeles in general is plagued and ravaged with air and smog pollution. And so I took up the mantle and really got involved with climate activism. And just, when I went into high school, I started doing a lot more of advocating for my community and my school peers.
So you've definitely had a personal connection to your motivation to being involved with the environmental movement and climate change. And, what are some of the things that you're working on now? I know that now that you're in college, you are doing quite a bit. You've done quite a bit through high school. What are some of the projects you're working on right now related to environmentalism and climate change?
Definitely. Right now, as I'm the founder and executive director of One Up Action International, an organization that's really about making sure BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous people of color and marginalized communities, low-income people, low-income youth, are able to get the resources to combat the climate crisis by, bringing their solutions, bringing innovative steps to combat the climate crisis. So we're pretty much giving resources to our communities that don't usually get these type of opportunities. We're not coming. A lot of us young people who come from these communities don't get to do a lot of the activities as affluent communities get to do, right? Like work for JPL or NASA or go to the Google Science Fair, and just in general, all these type of opportunities. So definitely the organization I'm working for, One Up Action, is pretty much wanting to making sure that BIPOC and marginalized voices have the resources to take action and are able to do it with support. Another thing I'm doing within the movement is making sure that we're really intersectional, right? I think one of the big things that I always talk about is intersectionality. Within the movement, within the climate movement, when we talk about intersectionality with the movement and making sure that all communities are present and included, we've done a poor job of this. It might be an intergenerational movement, right? But we talk the talk, but we don't walk the walk on intersectionality. And this is a huge issue that is affecting a lot of people. We really need to start bringing in more people from communities that are directly affected and are on the front lines of the climate crisis, and start talking about intersectionality within the movement and the climate movement. I say that we did a poor job because climate activism has, always been associated with, the white middle class, young people, and not youth of color or indigenous peoples or BIPOC communities, marginalized communities, or even low income youth, right? And within this movement, people tend to forget that those who are in power have a sense of privilege and are, white. It is a battle to get space you deserve, right? So it's very important that we start finding solutions and fixing intersectionality within the movement. And that is exactly what I've been doing, is making sure that we're not only bringing in voices, but we're not tokenizing them, and they have the seat at the table so that they're able to bring their solutions and really dictate what happens within their community, right? Um, so while working with One Up Action to get resources for BIPOC communities, marginalized voices, and low-income youth, I'm also working on intersectionality within the movement.
I think that's fantastic. Your work is, I think, illuminating a lot that there isn't just one type of climate activist, and that the experiences that people have with environmentalism and how the environment impacts them based on their identities is a really important thing. I think that there has been a lot of progress with the environmental movement, especially in the last 10, 15 years. But you've really pointed out that it's been very monolithic.
in that there needs to be more nuance and more understanding of how the environment impacts people of different identities and different backgrounds in a variety of different ways. It's incredibly important, and I'm proud of the work that you're doing. Some of the research that we've been doing, my research partner and I, on Generation Z for the last few years, is that the environment has continually grown to be something that Generation Z very much so cares about. It's something that they care about when it comes to politics and government involvement, but they're also personal involvement with the movement. Why do you think that environmentalism and the climate movement has become so important to Generation Z?
The reason why, Generation Z is so invested in environmentalism and the climate justice movement is because we already know that it's affecting our lives. A lot of our peers and a lot of our communities are being affected, and we are just simply wanting to fight for our future, right? And I think that is the one thing adults quite don't understand, is that we're already in the midst of the sixth mass extinction, where plants and animals, are going extinct, and we're seeing deforestation of forests. We're seeing natural disasters, such as hurricanes and rapid hurricanes that are happening in the states. And so we're seeing our communities already being affected. And I think that's the reason why our generation is very invested within the climate movement. I actually want to say, we're named Generation Z, the last letter in the alphabet. And I think one of the things that is so important is that we are not the last generation that's going to be combating the climate crisis. We're really known as the generation as the Green New Deal, right? Gen G and D, the generation of the Green New Deal. And I think that is one of the, a lot of the young people and youth advocates kind of band together and saying, this is we shouldn't be classified as the last letter in the alphabet. We should be classified as the generation of the Green New Deal, because that is what we're trying to achieve within not only the United States but throughout the world, is making sure that world leaders are implementing these type of policies and these type of laws so that we can take climate action, because we know we are far behind, and we are at this moment losing the fight. And that might be pessimistic, but it's definitely something that we as young people know, and that is the reason why we're fighting, is that we have no time left to lollygag and stay in these current systems, and we're fighting the systems that no longer work for the people. So that is the reason why young people are so heavily involved in the climate movement.
I agree. I think that the foresight of how much it impacts your future
Hmm.
and the future of other generations is very mature. There's a lot of people that would look at policy and government and political arenas and say, I'm going to fight for the things that directly impact me here and now. And what I love about Generation Z is they're like, we need to be concerned about those things, but we also need to think about like 10, 15, 20 years down the road, what is the future looking like? And while I don't get to benefit from it immediately today, I care more about a brighter future. And I think that that's something that's so noteworthy about this generation and your generation especially.
Definitely.
I've definitely noticed more with this generation that there is individual commitment to this. While yes, people are concerned about politics and government and how that is a part of the Green New Deal, but there's a lot of individuals that want to get involved or are currently involved with the environmental movement. So from your perspective, I know you dedicate your life to this. You're so incredibly passionate about it. You eat, sleep, and breathe it pretty much. What would you suggest to your fellow Generation Z peers on how they can get involved with the climate movement and environmentalism? If you had your few quick tips to provide to people to get involved, what would you say?
I would say, I think one of the things I would say is just get involved. It's very easy. With the climate crisis, with the climate change, what can we do right now, right? That's the big question. And I think one of the things I would tell a fellow peer or a fellow student or a fellow, Generation Z member is like changing who we are, right? Our habits, changing the foods that we eat, how we travel, taking direct action to make our community better, planting trees, community action, community-based solutions that are already there, right? That is what we as individuals can really do, is making sure that we're taking the necessary steps to change who we are as people, but also making sure that we're taking systematic action as well, and demanding of our leaders, saying, hey, if we're able to do it, then you should be able to do it, right? And holding them accountable. And I think that is one of the things is the generation, my generation can do, is is just very much taking that first step, right? As an individual in their community and seeing what issues are there and start tackling it, start getting involved, plan events, get more community members involved, right? I think in this current climate, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic, it's quite hard. I did want to add on to the point previously, when I was talking about why our generation is so involved. I think also it's like we're seeing that the current systems, right? When we talk about how the climate crisis comes about, is that the climate crisis is perpetrated by the systems of oppression and our current systems. And when I talk about the systems of oppression, I'm talking about racism, patriarchy, discrimination. All of these systems of oppression are causing the climate crisis, and because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've just seen that our current system no longer work for its people, right? And it hasn't been working for people that are Black, Brown, Indigenous, people of color, marginalized peoples, low income communities. And that in itself should be a wake-up call for everyone, right? Is that if our current systems are no longer working, if the fossil fuel industry during the COVID-19 pandemic, you know, struggled that much, we understand that we no longer rely on these systems and we need to start, changing the way we are living. And so what I would tell, young people that are my age that are wanting to get involved that have never been involved is just taking that first step, seeing what issues are in your community, doing what you can, and getting involved, right? There are many opportunities out there, and if there are not any opportunities, I would really suggest, and this is a way to plug in One Up Action, get involved with organizations. There are many organizations out there, but yeah.
I think, and you bring up a good way of like doing the self assessment, that there are certain ways that each individual can figure out how they're a part of the climate movement. And I think sometimes people even forget about the power of
Mm,
one person and changing personal behavior, because I know that this is something I really committed to, is like reducing single use plastic and looking at the ways in which, I'm sitting at my house a lot these days, identifying ways in which some of the materials I use in the consumer goods that I buy is not conducive to the environment. And even just me being a one consumer, but like I have a lifetime of consumerism that I can change. And while it's not going to maybe save the earth entirely by one person, I'm also doing my contribution in my own way. And I think sometimes people forget that their individual contribution can actually go a long way, and it does create a ripple effect over time. So yeah, I like, your suggestion of starting at home and thinking about like, how can I contribute? What are the ways that I feel comfortable and informed and ready to contribute? And then diving in, because I think that sometimes it's that first step that some people
mm-hmm,
get a little scared about. But yeah, I like your advice. I think we could also learn a little bit something for older generations, because there are some older generation advocates out there, for Generation Z. I qualify as one of those, of ways that older generations can be supporting the youth climate movement. What ways can older generations be supportive for activists such as yourself and other young people working in this space?
definitely. I guess there are many young youth organizations, right? If you have expertise on, law or any just expertise in any field, definitely reach out to these youth organizations. We're always looking for adult mentors, right? I think that is one of the things, the misconception that the youth movement is just a youth movement. We definitely rely on adult mentors, adult support. Um, so definitely that is one way that older generations get involved, is just offering their help to these youth organizations. Another way is financially, right? I think also right now a lot of youth movements are struggling, especially during the COVID-19 crisis, is that a lot of youth movements find it hard to fund a lot of the activities and campaigns that they're doing. So definitely there are many organizations out there that are doing great initiatives and that are youth led and BIPOC youth led. And I think many of the older generations can support that way financially. But another way, and this is not to get involved in youth organizations, another way in general, like just individuals or older generation individuals can get involved is just by voting. They have the power to vote, and a lot of younger generations that are in the age of 12 or 13 or 14, right, we're not able to quite vote yet. And so that is another way, is using your vote to, make a difference, electing politicians that are more progressive on the climate crisis. And I think that is one way that older generations can really support the youth climate movement. There are many other ways that, just older generations can help, but I think those are the three prominent ones that I find that we need the most of in the movement.
I think that's really important because once you become of voting age, you can vote for the rest of your life. And
Hmm.
I think as I've learned more and connected more with members of Generation Z, I've realized that my voting habits have changed because I think I'm becoming a little bit more ideologically like Gen Z. And I think, okay, well, what candidate is going to not only support the issues I care about, but the fact that there are young people that will be impacted by the decisions of these candidates that are going to live longer than I am, or that are going to be present and going to be in leadership positions in the future. And I think that that's so important that many times we vote with our own self interest
Hmm.
and the things that are going to immediately impact us. But when we think about like us being a collective community and thinking about the entirety of that community, it sometimes I think changes the way we think about our vote. And I love that example and that advice you have for older generations is thinking about those who can't vote and how their lives will be impacted if we vote one way or another or with a certain candidate or another.
Definitely.
So, Kevin, thank you for your advice, not only for your peers and for older generations to support the youth climate movement, but I like to wrap every episode up with discussing, the amazing things about Generation Z. There's thousands and thousands, and I could go on forever about it. But from your perspective, what are some of your favorite things about your Generation Z peers?
Definitely. I think one of the most, characteristics that I really find that, is my favorite thing about my peers and my generation is that, we don't take the BS that is coming from our world leaders. We're not the leaders of tomorrow, we're the leaders of today. And I always say that. And that is what my generation encompasses, that we're the next youth advocates or the change makers. We're doing it right now. We're doing the work right now. And I think that in itself is my favorite thing, is that we are the leaders of right now. And that kind of just inspires me that, I think with all the obstacles my generation is facing, you know, we don't let that deter us from doing what we love to do or what we want to do, right? And that in itself is like, that persistence to get what we want to get, and we get it done, right? I think that is one of the things I find about my generation that I love the most. And
I appreciate that as well. I think that there is a level of, I don't want to say rebellion because sometimes that word gets like a nasty connotation, but there is this kind of an ethos with Generation Z around not waiting for other people to tell them it's their time to lead. Because I think that that's something that has been really detrimental for society for a really long time, is that young people can't lead and young people can't have good ideas just because they have less experience on earth. And I think that discounts the important experiences that you've had. And so I can agree 100% that I think Generation Z is using the
mhm,
energy that they have right now to do what they can. And it would be really magical if we had older generations. And you brought up a really good point. Like older generations can be fantastic mentors. That's what mentors do, is they share experience with younger generations or with their mentees. And I wonder what kind of harmony would be created if we looked at it with Generation Z has this energy right now and this passion to fix things, but older generations might have the finances and the experience. We teamed up on things. I wonder what society would look like.
I definitely also want to add, like, I think this is one of, my mentor once told me this, is like when we change, the world changes. The key to all changes are inner transformation, right? A change of our hearts and our minds. And this is human revolution, right? I think that even though that revolution gets a negative connotation, I think human revolution is what we need the most, right? A change of our minds and our hearts. We have the power to change, and when we realize the truth, we can bring forth that power anywhere, anytime, in any situation. And I think that in itself encompasses my generation and older generations as well. Is that if older generations are willing to change, then definitely we as a society and we as human beings can really truly make a difference in our planet, right? And that really encompasses what activism is all about. Is that it's not a passion for a lot of people. It's a lot of, for me especially, it's a survival tool. And I think, just to end it, I think that I find activism, and I find the things that I do daily is, I do it for my community because, my community is being hurt the most and we're at the front lines. But yeah, I just thank you for inviting me on this podcast. It's been nice chatting with you.
Kevin, thank you for being here. It has been wonderful to learn from you, learn about you, and get advice from you on how people can support the climate movement. I'm positive there are people that would be interested in following along with your journey and the work that you're doing. What is the best way for people to connect with you and follow along?
Definitely. If you want to follow my personal journey, you can follow me at I'm Kevin J Patel. And if you want to follow my organization and our team, our amazing team, you can follow us at One Up Action. We don't get confused by our chapters. It's just at One Up Action on all social medias, and on Twitter it's at One Up Action Inc. If you want to follow my journey, I'm Kevin J Patel. So I am and then KEVINJPATEL.
And that is for your Twitter and Instagram, correct?
Yeah.
Perfect. I would really suggest following Kevin. He is providing a lot of content that I've been following, especially since we've been connected, and it's been great to learn from him. So would encourage that to everyone. Kevin, thank you again for being here. It has just been an absolute delight to spend time with you.
Thank you so much for having me.
First, a big thank you to Kevin for joining me in this conversation. Kevin is beyond passionate about the climate change and climate justice movement. I so appreciate his insights around the need to recognize the impacts of climate change from an intersectional lens. Kevin's work and leadership in this space is just one of the many examples of Generation Z youth who are working to make our Earth cleaner and more sustainable. There are many ways we can do our own part to support the climate movement and the Gen Z leaders who are paving the way. If you'd like to follow along with Kevin's journey and the important work he's doing, he can be found on social media, or you can learn about his work with One Up Action at oneupaction.org. As I'm gearing up to release more episodes, I'm excited to share new adventures for hashtag Gen Z listeners. There's now a hashtag Gen Z Patreon community. Through the Patreon community, you can become a member of a community of hashtag Gen Z listeners. Think of this as a book club style experience for listeners of this podcast. It will provide ways for listeners to come together to discuss episodes as well as current events and Generation Z. There are 3 tiers of membership, and each tier has unique benefits from early access to episode content to live Q&A sessions and one-on-one calls with me to discuss all of your Gen Z questions. I'll add this to the show notes on my website, but you can join the hashtag Gen Z community on Patreon at patreon.com/Gen Z Megan M. Grace. And as always, if you enjoyed this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll continue this discussion into the social issues important to Gen Z in coming episodes. But if you have a topic you're interested in or a member of Generation Z I need to chat with, please head over to my website, meganmgrace.com, or find me on social media to drop me a quick note. Thank you again for stopping by for this episode. Let's continue this conversation, and we'll chat soon.